For more than 2,000 years, the Olympic Games have represented the highest ideals of human competition. Every 4 years, the world gathers to watch all of these athletes push the limits of what the human body can achieve. But behind the gold medals and the cheering crowds lies a much deeper story. A story that stretches from the sacred temples of ancient Greece to political protests broadcast across the world to stadiums that now sit silent and abandoned.
I walk through silence, thick and cold, where shadows drift and time grows old. No voice to call, no path to take, just fog and fear with every ache. Souls in the fog.
The Olympics have witnessed triumph, tragedy, propaganda, and rebellion. But the Olympic story is not just about victory. It's also about war, politics, forgotten athletes, and abandoned monuments of ambition. Because when the crowds leave and the cameras go dark, some Olympic stadiums are left behind to just slowly decay. But before we reach to those silent arenas, we need to travel back, far back, to a sacred valley in ancient Greece, the birthplace of the Olympics. Our story begins in 776 BC in the sanctuary of Olympia, a religious center dedicated to the king of the Greek gods, Zeus. At Olympia stood temples, statues, and a simple dirt track carved into the earth. Here, city-states from across Greece gathered to compete. The games were sacred. Athletes swore an oath before a massive statue of Zeus that they had trained honestly and would compete with honor. Anyone caught cheating would be publicly whipped or fined. Amusingly, those fines would be used to build bronze statues called zanes, which stood along the entrance to the stadium as permanent reminders of shame. The earliest recorded Olympic victor was a cook named Corybus of Elis. His event was simple, a sprint. Roughly 190 meters down the stadium track, that race, called the Stadion, was the only event at the very first Olympics. And Corybus won. His name became the first recorded Olympic champion in history. No gold medal, no podium, just eternal fame. Over time, the Olympics grew into a massive festival. New events were added: wrestling, boxing, chariot racing, pankration, which is a brutal sport combining wrestling and boxing, where almost anything is allowed. The athletes competed naked, coated in olive oil and dust. Victors received only one prize, a wreath made from olive branches. But the reward back home was far greater. Champions were treated like heroes. Some cities even knocked holes in their defensive walls, claiming their city no longer needed protection if it could produce such a warrior. One of the most famous Olympic athletes in history was Milo of Croton. Milo dominated wrestling in the 6th century BC, winning multiple Olympic titles. Stories about him became legendary. According to ancient writers, Milo trained by carrying a newborn calf on his shoulders every day. As the calf grew into a bull, Milo grew stronger. Another story claims that Milo once stood on a greased discus and dared anyone to push him off, and no one could move him. But Milo's death is perhaps the strangest part of his story. While walking through the forest, he saw a tree trunk split by wedges. Milo tried to tear the trunk apart with his bare hands. When the wedges slipped out, the tree snapped shut, trapping him. And unable to escape, he was reportedly eaten by wolves. The legendary athlete defeated not in the arena, but by nature itself. The Olympics were so important that Greek city-states agreed to something extraordinary, a temporary ceasefire called the Echinacea. And during the games, war stopped, armies paused, travelers could safely cross enemy territory to attend the festivals. For a brief moment, every 4 years, Greece put down its weapons and gathered in one place. For nearly 1,200 years, the Olympics continued. Athletes traveled from across the Greek world and later from the Roman Empire as well. But slowly, the political world was changing, and religious traditions that created the Olympics, they were coming under attack. By the late Roman Empire, Christianity was spreading rapidly, and the traditional Greek and Roman religions, once dominant, were now seen by many as pagan superstition. One emperor in particular would bring the ancient Olympic tradition to an end. His name was Theodosius I, and in 380 AD, Theodosius declared Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire. Soon after, he began issuing laws targeting the pagan religious practices. Temples were closed, ancient rituals were banned, and in 393 AD, Theodosius issued an edict prohibiting pagan festivals. The Olympic Games were one of those festivals. So for over 1,000 years, the Olympics had been held to honor Zeus. Now, they were illegal. Games stopped, the stadiums emptied, the temples fell silent. In the centuries that followed, the sanctuary at Olympia suffered disasters. Earthquakes struck the region, floods buried the stadium in mud and sediment. And over time, once great Olympic grounds disappeared beneath layers of earth. For nearly 1,500 years, the Olympics existed only in ancient texts and fading memory, and that tradition seemed lost forever. In the late 1800s, a French aristocrat became fascinated by the idea of international sport. His name was Pierre de Coubertin. Born in 1863 in Paris, Coubertin believed physical education could strengthen both individuals and nations. But he also had a bigger dream. He believed sports could bring countries together and reduce conflict. After studying ancient Greek history, Coubertin proposed something bold: to revive the Olympic Games. In 1894, he organized an international conference at the Sorbonne University. Delegates from 13 countries attended, and there he proposed a new international sporting event inspired by the ancient Olympics. The idea worked. The delegates voted to create the International Olympic Committee. The first modern Olympics would take place just 2 years later, in Greece. In 1896, the Summer Olympics were held in Athens. The venue was the ancient-style Panathenaic Stadium, rebuilt from marble. Only 241 athletes participated. All of them were men. They represented just 14 countries. Yet the event was an enormous success. One of the most memorable moments came during the marathon. A Greek water carrier named Spiridon Louis shocked the world by winning the race. When Louis entered the stadium, the crowd erupted. The Greek king reportedly ran onto the track to celebrate with him. The Olympics were back. The 1904 Summer Olympics hosted one of the most bizarre sporting events in history, and this was an Olympic marathon. What happened that day still sounds almost unbelievable. The race took place on August 30th, 1904 in St. Louis. The temperatures had reached 90 degrees Fahrenheit. The course ran along dusty country roads. Cars driving alongside the race kicked up huge clouds of dust. And unbelievably, there were only 2 water stations on the entire 24.8-mile course. The lack of water was intentional. Olympic organizer James Edward Sullivan wanted to study the effects of purposeful dehydration. What a dick. Runners began to collapse. 32 athletes had started the race. Very quickly, the brutal conditions had taken their toll. One runner, William Garcia, collapsed after inhaling so much dust that his esophagus was coated with dirt and his stomach lining tore. This man nearly died. Another runner, Len Tao, was chased nearly a mile off course by aggressive dogs. One of the most unusual competitors was a Cuban mailman. His name? Felix Caraval. Now, he had raised money for the trip by running across Cuba. But after arriving in the United States, he lost all his money gambling in New Orleans. He hitchhiked the rest of the way to St. Louis, and he arrived wearing street clothes. Another runner had used a knife to cut his pants into makeshift running shorts. During the race, Carval became hungry and stopped at an orchard. He decided to eat several apples. Unfortunately, they were rotten. From these rotten apples, he got himself a pretty severe set of stomach cramps. So he lay down beside the road and just took a nap. After waking up, he resumed running, and he still finished fourth. Now, while all this is going on, an American runner, Frederick Lors, collapsed after 9 miles. His manager picked him up in a car. They drove about 11 miles of the race route when the car broke down near the stadium. Lors decided to jog the rest of the way. He entered the stadium to cheering crowds. Officials initially declared him the winner, but spectators who had seen the car ride exposed the truth. Lors was immediately disqualified. The actual winner of this race would be a man named Thomas Hicks. His victory was even stranger. Around mile 10, Hicks was exhausted and begging for water. His trainers refused. Instead, they gave him egg whites mixed with strychnine, a toxic chemical commonly used for rat poison. Now, in tiny doses, strychnine can act as a stimulant. Today, it would be considered illegal doping, but at the time, there were no rules about that. Now, as the race would continue, Hicks got weaker. His trainers gave him a second dose of strychnine, this time washed down with brandy. The poison began affecting his body. His face turned gray, his eyes got glassy, he began hallucinating and believed the finish line was still 20 miles away. Yet somehow he still kept moving. When Hicks finally entered the stadium, he could barely walk. His trainers had to hold him upright as he was just shuffling forward. They essentially carried him across the finish line, and he collapsed immediately afterward. Doctors had to work on him for nearly an hour before he had recovered enough to even be able to stand up. Now, despite everything that had happened that day, the cheating, the poison, the collapsing runners, Thomas Hicks was officially declared the Olympic champion. His finishing time of 3 hours, 28 minutes remains the slowest Olympic marathon victory ever recorded. The Olympic marathon is one of the most iconic events in sports. Today, every marathon in the world is exactly 26 miles and 385 yards long. It's an oddly specific number that was never part of the original race. In fact, the distance exists today because of a royal request made during the 1908 Olympics. Now, the idea of the marathon itself comes from ancient Greece. According to legend, a messenger named Phidippides ran from the battlefield at the Battle of Marathon to Athens in 490 BC. The Greeks had just defeated a massive Persian invasion. The messenger ran roughly 25 miles to deliver the news. When he arrived in Athens, he reportedly shouted one word, "victory," and then collapsed and died from exhaustion. While historians debate whether the story is completely accurate, the legend inspired organizers of the first modern Olympics to create a long-distance race symbolizing that heroic run. In 1896, the Summer Olympics, the marathon distance was roughly 40 kilometers, or about 24.8 miles, just shy of the 25 miles. The race began near the town of Marathon and ended in the Panathenaic Stadium. Greek runner Spiridon Louis won the race. His victory turned him into a national hero. Crowds reportedly ran alongside him as he approached the stadium. The marathon quickly became one of the most celebrated Olympic events, but the distance itself was still inconsistent. Each Olympic Games used slightly different courses. There goes slightly different lengths. Until 1908. The 1908 Summer Olympics were held in London. Organizers had initially planned the marathon distance to be about 25 miles. But the British royal family had a special request. The race should begin on the lawn of Windsor Castle. This would allow the royal children to watch the runners start the race. The finish line, meanwhile, would be inside White City Stadium, specifically directly in front of the royal viewing box. When the distance between those 2 points was measured, the race ended up being exactly 26 miles and 385 yards. The race began at Windsor Castle and wound through the streets of London before entering the stadium. There, thousands of spectators watched the runners stagger toward the finish line. The most famous moment of the race involved Italian runner Dorando Petri. Petri entered the stadium first, but he was completely exhausted and he ran in the wrong direction, collapsed, stood up again, collapsed again. Officials eventually helped him cross the finish line, but because he received assistance, he was disqualified. The official gold medal victory went to American runner Johnny Hayes. However, Petri became the emotional hero of the race. Alexandra personally presented him with a special silver cup in recognition of his effort. The dramatic London Marathon captured global attention. The unusual race distance stuck, and in 1921, the Olympic governing body officially standardized the marathon distance to match the 1908 course. Since then, every Olympic marathon and every major marathon worldwide has been exactly 26 miles and 385 yards, all because the British royal family wanted a better view. As the Olympics grew, they became more than a sporting event. They became a stage for world politics, tragedy, and global change. The 1936 Summer Olympics were unlike any Olympic Games before them. They were the first Olympic Games broadcast on television. But more importantly, they became a global stage for the political ambitions of Adolf Hitler and the Nazi regime. Germany had originally been awarded the Olympics in 1931, before the Nazi Party had come to power. But when Hitler became Chancellor in 1933, the new government quickly realized the Games could be an enormous propaganda opportunity. The regime invested massive resources into the event. A new Olympic complex called the Olympia Stadion in Berlin was constructed, and it seated over 100,000 spectators and was designed to showcase Nazi architectural power. As swastika banners hung across the city, the regime hoped the Games would present Nazi Germany as peaceful, modern, and powerful. And during this time, anti-Jewish signs temporarily disappeared from the streets to avoid the international criticism. And one of the most famous Olympic traditions actually began here, the Olympic torch relay. Organizers lit a flame in Olympia and carried it across Europe to Berlin. The relay passed through Greece, through Bulgaria, Yugoslavia, through Hungary, through Austria, through Czechoslovakia, and into Germany. It's designed to symbolically connect ancient Greece to Nazi Germany. The tradition continues in every Olympics, all the way up to the modern. And one of the most famous athletes in Olympic history arrived in Berlin that summer. His name? Jesse Owens. Now, Owens had grown up in poverty in Alabama before becoming a track star at Ohio State University. At the 1935 Big Ten Championships, Owens achieved something astonishing. In less than 1 hour, he had tied the world record for the 100-yard dash, set a world record in the long jump, set a world record in the 20-yard dash, set a world record in the 220 dash, and in the 220 hurdles. Many historians consider it the greatest single hour in sports history. And at the Berlin Games, Owens competed in 4 events. He won gold medals in the 100-meter sprint, the 200-meter sprint, the long jump, and the 4x100-meter relay. His victory in the long jump created one of the most famous Olympic sportsmanship stories. Owens struggled during qualifying and almost fouled out. It was a German competitor, Luz Long, offering Owens advice on where to place his takeoff mark. Owens followed the suggestion. He qualified. And later, he won the gold medal. Long finished second. After the competition, Long publicly congratulated Owens in front of the crowd, a powerful gesture in Nazi Germany. Owens later said that friendship meant more to him than any medal. Now, a famous myth says that Hitler refused to shake Owens' hand. The reality is a little bit different. On the first day of the Games, Hitler personally congratulated some of the German winners, but the International Olympic Committee warned that if he congratulated athletes, he had to congratulate all athletes. Rather than do that, Hitler stopped meeting winners entirely. Now, amusingly, Owens said later that he felt slighted more by Franklin D. Roosevelt, who never invited him to the White House after his victories. In 1936, the Olympics became one of the most politically charged sporting events in history. They demonstrated how global sports could be used for propaganda and ideology. But they also created one of the most enduring Olympic stories, the triumph of Jesse Owens in front of a regime built on racial supremacy. The 1968 Olympics took place during one of the most turbulent years in modern history. 1968 saw protests erupt across the world. Paris, Prague, the United States, Mexico, and the Olympic Games would soon reflect that tension. American sprinter Tommie Smith dominated the 200-meter race. On October 16, 1968, Smith won gold with a world record time of 19.83 seconds. Australian runner Peter Norman took silver. American sprinter John Carlos won the bronze. But the medal ceremony would become one of the most iconic moments in Olympic history. As the U.S. national anthem began to play, Smith and Carlos bowed their heads, and each raised a black-gloved fist, a gesture symbolizing black power and the resistance against racial injustice in America. They also wore no shoes, only black socks. This symbolized poverty among black Americans. Carlos wore beads to represent victims of racial violence. Norman, the Australian silver medalist, quietly supported them by wearing a badge for the Olympic Project for Human Rights. The reaction to this was immediate. The International Olympic Committee president, Avery Brundage, demanded punishment. Within 48 hours, Smith and Carlos were expelled from Olympic Village. They were suspended from the U.S. Olympic team. The backlash when they got home to the United States was intense. Smith and Carlos received death threats, public condemnation, severe criticism from media and politicians, and both struggled professionally afterward. Carlos later said the protests cost him potential athletic opportunities and endorsements. But decades later, the moment became widely recognized as a historic stand for civil rights. Australian athlete Peter Norman also faced consequences. Although he supported the protests, the Australian Olympic Committee never officially punished him. Many believe his support contributed to him being left off the 1972 Olympic team, despite qualifying times. For decades, Norman received little recognition in Australia. Only years later was he honored for his role in the moment. I don't think he had a big enough role in the moment, but tell me what you think down in the comments. Now we roll up to the 1972 Summer Olympics, and these were supposed to represent a new Germany. Less than 3 decades after World War II, West Germany wanted to show the world a peaceful, democratic nation. The games were called the Happy Olympics. Security was intentionally relaxed. Police carried minimal weapons. The Olympic Village had low fences. Athletes walked freely between buildings. But that openness would soon lead to disaster. In the early morning hours of September 5th, 1972, 8 members of the Palestinian militant group, the Black September Organization, approached the Olympic Village. They wore tracksuits and they carried duffel bags. Inside the bags were AK-47 rifles and grenades. And around 4:30 a.m., they climbed the fence surrounding the Olympic Village. Some athletes returning from a night out reportedly helped them climb over, believing that they were fellow competitors trying to sneak back into the village. And the attackers headed straight for the building housing the Israeli team. Inside were members of the Israeli Olympic team. When the attackers forced their way inside, wrestling coach Moshe Weinberg fought back. He was shot and killed. A weightlifter Yosef Romano also attempted to resist, and he too was shot and killed. 9 other Israeli athletes and coaches were taken hostage. The attackers demanded the release of 234 Palestinian prisoners held in Israel, along with several imprisoned militants in Germany. The world woke up to some shocking news that day. The Olympics had become the center of a global hostage crisis. And for nearly 20 hours, the crisis unfolded live on television. More than 900 million people worldwide were watching these events play out on television from their homes. Journalists were broadcasting from rooftops overlooking the Olympic Village, but the live coverage created a dangerous problem. The militants inside the building were watching television as well. So when the German police began a rescue attempt, the attackers could see the preparations in real time. The plan had to be aborted. And eventually the attackers demanded transportation to an airport where they would fly to Cairo, Egypt. West German authorities agreed. Late that evening, helicopters transported the hostages and terrorists to an airbase outside Munich. German police planned an ambush, but the operation was disastrously unprepared. There were just too few snipers, communication was poor, and there were really no trained counterterrorism units. So when the shooting started, chaos absolutely erupted. The gunfight lasted nearly an hour, and in the end, all 9 of the Israeli hostages were killed. 5 of the terrorists were also killed. A German police officer was shot and killed, and the Olympics paused. For the first time in modern Olympic history, the Games stopped. The next day, a memorial ceremony was held in Olympic Stadium. The International Olympic Committee President Avery Brundage addressed the world, and he spoke the now controversial words, "The Games must go on." After this brief pause, the Olympics resumed. But the tragedy forever changed the event. Security at the Olympics would never again be so relaxed. By the 1980s, the Olympics had become deeply entangled in global politics. Cold War divided the world into 2 competing power bases, and the Olympic Games became another arena for that rivalry. In 1979, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. In response, U.S. President Jimmy Carter demanded that the Soviets withdraw. When they refused, the United States organized a boycott of the 1980 Summer Olympics. More than 60 countries refused to participate. It became the largest Olympic boycott in history. But the political retaliation was only the beginning. 4 years later, the Olympics moved to Los Angeles for the 1984 Summer Olympics. Just weeks before the Games began, the Soviet Union made a shocking announcement. They would not attend. The Soviet government claimed the decision was based on security concerns and anti-Soviet sentiment in the U.S. Most historians agree the boycott was retaliation for the 1980 Moscow boycott. Several Soviet allies did join the boycott. These countries included East Germany, Cuba, Bulgaria, Hungary, and Poland, and a few others. In total, it was 14 Eastern Bloc nations that refused to attend. This dramatically altered the competition. Some sports were missing the world's best athletes. Others, the absence of the Eastern Bloc competitors made it much easier for Western athletes to win medals. Despite the boycott, the 1984 Los Angeles Olympics turned out to be an enormous success. Unlike previous Olympics, Los Angeles relied heavily on private funding and existing stadiums rather than a massive new construction. The Games actually turned a profit, something extremely rare for Olympic hosts. Many historians believe the financial success of the 1984 Olympic Games helped reshape how modern Olympics became organized. The Olympic Games have survived wars, political protests, boycotts, and tragedies. Yet every 4 years, the world still gathers to celebrate sport. New stadiums are built, new records are set, new champions are crowned. But when the Olympic flame is extinguished, many of these arenas are left behind. Around the world today, some of these Olympic venues have become something unexpected. Not monuments to victory, but ghosts of the Olympics. Today, across the world, the remains of the past Olympic Games still stand. Some are maintained, others are slowly collapsing. The bobsled track from the 1984 Winter Olympics in Sarajevo once hosted elite winter athletes, but during the Bosnian War, the track became an artillery position. Today, it sits covered in graffiti and trees growing through the concrete. In 2016, the Summer Olympics built an enormous Olympic park in Rio. And only years later, the pools turned green, facilities closed, entire complexes sat unused. Some venues were eventually repurposed, others just remained abandoned. In 2004, the Olympic Games had returned to where it all began. The 2004 Summer Olympics were meant to celebrate the modern revival of the Olympics in Greece. More than a century after the first modern games were held here in 1896. For Greece, hosting the Olympics again was more than just a sporting event. It was a matter of national pride. But it would also become one of the most controversial Olympic legacies in history. Now, leading up to the Games, the Greek government launched one of the most ambitious construction projects for the Olympics ever attempted. More than $11 billion was spent preparing Athens. Entire transportation networks were expanded, new highways were built, the city's airport was modernized, and across Athens, massive Olympic venues began rising from the ground. At the center of it all was the Athens Olympic Sports Complex, a futuristic stadium designed by Spanish architect Santiago Calatrava. The complex featured sweeping white arches stretching across the sky, designed to symbolize the wings of Nike, the Greek goddess of victory. When the Olympics opened on August 13, 2004, the world watched. The opening ceremony celebrated thousands of years of Greek history, from ancient mythology to modern culture. For 2 weeks, Athens became the center of the world. Athletes competed in brand new arenas across the city. Swimming pools sparkled under stadium lights. Volleyball courts sat beside the Aegean Sea. Everything appeared to be a triumph. But when the Olympic flame was extinguished, a difficult question emerged. What would happen to all these venues? Unlike cities with large professional sports leagues, Athens had limited use for many of the specialized Olympic facilities. Maintenance costs were enormous, and within only a few years, signs of abandonment had begun to appear. And one of the most striking examples of this is the Hellinikon Olympic Complex. Built on the site of Athens' former airport. Now, during the Olympics, Hellinikon hosted events including baseball, softball, canoeing, fencing, and basketball. But after the games ended, most of the complex just fell into disuse. Today, aerial photographs reveal empty stadiums surrounded by cracked concrete, weeds growing through the once perfect walkways, and the bleachers sit silent under the Mediterranean sun. The baseball stadium, a sport with little following in Greece, was abandoned almost immediately after the Olympics. Other Olympic venues across Athens suffered similar fates. At the Olympic Canoe Kayak Slalom Center, that's a lot to say, the artificial river that once carried Olympic athletes through roaring rapids now sits dry. Nearby seating areas rust in the heat. The Olympic softball stadium stands largely unused. And grass grows through the infield where international teams once competed. And even parts of the main Olympic complex have struggled with any kind of maintenance. What were once symbols of national pride became reminders of enormous costs. The timing of the Athens Olympics would later become controversial for another reason. Just a few years after the Games, Greece experienced a severe financial crisis that shook the country's economy. And many critics argued that Olympic spending had contributed to the government's financial strain. While economists still debate how large a role the Olympics played, the abandoned venues became a powerful symbol of the risks of hosting the Games. And over time, these Olympic sites have taken on a strange second life. Urbex explorers and photographers travel from around the world to see them. Graffiti artists have transformed blank stadium walls into massive murals. Nature slowly reclaims the structures, grass growing through once perfect tracks, birds nesting in the rafters of empty arenas. The stadiums built for the world now sit in silence. Because of these failures, the International Olympic Committee began pushing for sustainable Olympics. Recent host cities now try to reuse existing stadiums and build temporary venues to avoid massive new construction. And cities like London successfully transformed Olympic parks into public spaces after the Games. But the debate still continues. Are the Olympics still worth the cost? For a few weeks, every 4 years, the Olympics brings the world together. Records are broken. Athletes become legends. Cities shine under the global spotlight. But when the crowds leave and the cameras disappear, many Olympic venues remain behind. Silent stadiums, empty tracks, the ghosts of the greatest sporting events on Earth. The Olympics celebrate humanity's greatest achievements, but their abandoned arenas remind us of something else. Even the grandest moments in history eventually fade into silence. So what did y'all think of the Olympics episode? This was an interesting one. The strangest race, that 1904 race, was absolutely wild. I had to read that 3 or 4 times through to get everything right when I was actually reading to research it, because I kept going back and forth through the different articles about this race and looking at it, and I was just amazed that so much happened within one race, and that anybody won and set the slowest record for a marathon victory was outstanding. Other than that, it was an interesting episode to follow along with, and I definitely learned. I always knew that there was a lot of problems with the Olympics as far as the cost of them and what do they do with the facilities afterwards. Most go into disuse, and it's not good. It's an expense that people pay for in the country, and if it's not getting used, it's a huge waste. But it's still something that people like to see every 4 years. Do you watch the Olympics? Let me know. Hit that like button, subscribe, share. Don't forget to leave some comments. We'll see you in the next episode.